Good afternoon, Rules Committee will come to order. And thank you very much for joining us again today. As Capitol Hill and our members are now learning, Vice Chairman Tom Cole's Chief of Staff, Sean Murphy, unexpectedly passed away from natural causes earlier this morning. On behalf of the entire Rules Committee, I'd like to extend our thoughts and prayers to Tom, Chairman Cole, and his entire team, and to the Murphy family. Many of us knew Sean not only as Tom's Chief of Staff for the last 7 years, but also was a loving husband and devoted father of 3 children. And before we begin, I'd like to take a moment of silence to acknowledge Sean's passing. Thank you very much. I have a statement that I would like to enter in the record. I'll let the gentlewoman see this first and would ask unanimous consent without objection to enter that into the record. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Today, the Rules Committee will be considering H.R. 1153, the Mortgage Choice Act of 2017, H.R. 4471, the Small Bank Holding Company Relief Act of 2018, and H.R. 772, the Common Sense Nutrition Disclosure Act of 2017. H.R. 1153 fixes inconsistencies in the definition of fees and points, that's in quotation mark, under the qualified mortgage rule that went into effect January 10th, 2014. This bipartisan piece of legislation makes it easier for first-time homebuyers to get a mortgage that they can afford and gives consumers greater choice when they select a title insurance provider or an appraisal service. The second bill under consideration, H.R. 4471, raises the consolidated asset threshold under the Federal Reserve's Small Bank Holding Company policy statement from $1 billion to $3 billion. Small bank holding companies and small savings and loans holding companies face unique challenges with regard to capital formation. This legislation seeks to alleviate some of those challenges, further facilitating the ability of community banks to issue debt and raise capital, and thus increase their involvement in promoting economic growth in local communities, not also to mention and matching up with consumers that want to buy a home in this country. The final bill under consideration addresses the Food and Drug Administration's final menu labeling regulations, which are overly prescriptive and too rigid for food establishments like convenience stores, supermarkets, grocery stores, and pizza shops. H.R. 772 provides flexibility to ensure food service entities can utilize alternative message to food labeling that are appropriate for their diverse business models and that are less burdensome, but accomplish the same goal of providing nutrition information to consumers. H.R. 772 rightly provides restaurants and small or similar retail establishments 90 days to correct a violation before enforcement action is taken. So, without objection, I'd like to welcome the distinguished gentleman, the young chairman from Dallas, Texas, Chairman Jeb Henserling, as well as the gentleman from Massachusetts, the young Congressman Capuano. Michael, congratulations on getting to the Super Bowl. I thought it was a great game, and I know, like everybody in your family and in the state, you feel like Tom Brady did a great job, and your team did also. And they should be congratulated. No, sir. Strong congratulations. As a strong Dallas Cowboy fan, I will tell you, we know who owns the Super Bowl record. And no, I was going to the place that congratulations, you got a great team. So we're delighted to have both of you here at the Rules Committee today. So without objection, anything you have in writing that will be in the record. And I look forward to your testimony. But before we go any further, we want to make sure that the gentlewoman, the ranking member from New York, is recognized, and the gentlewoman is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
First, I need to tell you that Brett Guthrie has told me that the University of Kentucky's basketball team is awful. And I've never had that in my life. I was saying to them, I was a married woman with 3 children, I think, before I ever watched Kentucky lose a basketball game. I couldn't, I thought it was illegal for them to lose. I honestly did.
Well, that was before 19, that was after
It was
19,
about
after
1920,
after
somewhere.
1948.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Anyway, I'd like to introduce a guest, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to introduce Mimi Ishmael. She is a student at George Washington University, getting a master's degree in public health, which is the degree I share with her. She's come to watch us polish off democracy like cleaning a fish.
Get rid of those scales and that extraneous stuff. Mimi, welcome. Delighted that you're here. My oldest son, where's Mimi? Oh, there's Mimi over there. Mimi, good to see you. You were smiling on the front row. My son is third-year medical school student. He's going to be an MD, and I know the trials and tribulations that you've faced. We need bright young people like you, so congratulations and welcome. Okay. Mr. Chairman, we're delighted that you're here. The young chairman from Dallas, Texas is recognized.
Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Slaughter, member of the Rules Committee, thank you for allowing me to testify today yet again. Before proceeding to the business of the Financial Services Committee bills before the floor, I do wish to add my voice of condolence as well on the passing of Mr. Murphy. Although I was not personally acquainted with him, I know Mr. Cole very well, our colleague from Oklahoma. I also know, having served in this body for 15 years now, that quite often we spend more time with our staffs than we do our own families, and in some respects, they become a part of our extended family. Tom Cole is a man of incredible integrity and passion for this institution, who has a reputation of finding solutions. He is a leader within our institution, and I just wanted to offer not only my sympathies, obviously, to the Murphy family, but to my colleague, Mr. Cole, as well. Now, proceeding to the business before us, I do appreciate the opportunity to speak about 2 bipartisan bills passed by the Financial Services Committee, H.R. 1153, the Mortgage Choice Act of 2017, and H.R. 4771, the Small Bank Holding Company Relief Act. H.R. 1153 is co-sponsored by Mr. Huizinga from Michigan, and I would note it passed our committee on a very strong bipartisan vote, 46-13, garnering a little less than half of the Democrats on our committee. It provides much-needed regulatory relief to our community financial institutions and, more importantly, the customers they serve. The Mortgage Choice Act would change the way points and fees are calculated by excluding fees paid for affiliate title charges and escrow charges for insurance and taxes. Currently, CFPB rules include affiliated title charges under a 3% cap when determining whether a mortgage can be a quote-unquote qualified mortgage. I would note, though, that unaffiliated title charges are not subject to this same cap. The CFPB rules are detrimental then to low and moderate income borrowers and first-time home buyers, since they are more likely to have smaller loan amounts and would therefore more easily trigger this 3% cap. In other words, under the current definition, many mortgage applicants will be denied simply because they do not fit into the government box of an ideal candidate to own a home, or the only mortgages available to them may be at a higher interest rate, perhaps making them unaffordable for some first-time homebuyers and Americans with low and moderate incomes. As one such prospective homebuyer put it in Michigan, quote, qualifying for a mortgage has been increasingly difficult for those in the lower income bracket, even though buying a home would cost them less than rent. The very people this was supposed to be helpful to, lower income working Americans, have been parties most devastated by the overreach. I could not say it better, Mr. Chairman. Indeed, the CFPB's defective definition has ended up protecting many consumers right out of the chance to buy a home. And if I could, at this point, Mr. Chairman, I do want to point out, and it is important to note, that roughly 44 states in the union already regulate title insurance fees or subject them to a rate approval process. I would also note under RESPA, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act that it is unlawful to offer kickbacks or referral fees, and under this same statute, RESPA, all consumers must have information. It must be disclosed that they can shop for their title insurer. They do not have to take an affiliated title insurer, but often, Mr. Chairman, the affiliated title insurer is cheaper. But yet the current CFPB rule presents a practical hurdle from them taking the cheaper title insurance. And I would note, for those who believe there are captives, roughly 3/4 of all home buyers use an unaffiliated title insurer, so the market is indeed working. Providing clarity to the calculation of points and fees would allow more loans to qualify as qualified mortgages. That would therefore increase home ownership opportunities for credit-worthy borrowers. Simply put, this bill would make home ownership more affordable for many. It will promote access to affordable mortgage credit for low and moderate income families and first-time homebuyers. And it does this while continuing to protect consumers from bad loans. And I want to remind all my colleagues that when the House considered this bill in the 113th Congress, identical, it passed by voice vote. It passed by voice vote in the 113th. In the 114th, it still passed by an overwhelming majority, and again, it passed our committee recently by a vote of 46-13. Mr. Chairman, we are hoping third time proves to be the charm. Also before us today is another equally important piece of legislation, H.R. 4771, the Small Bank Holding Company Relief Act of 2018, sponsored by Ms. Love of Utah. It passed our committee also with a strong bipartisan vote of 41-14, meaning yet again roughly half the Democrats on our committee supported this bill. This provision was also included in a bill that recently passed the Senate Banking Committee, also with a very strong bipartisan vote of 16-7. The Federal Reserve Small Bank Holding Company Policy Statement is a regulation that allows certain bank holding companies to hold more debt than would otherwise be permitted, as long as they do so under a number of ongoing requirements and restrictions. H.R. 4771 would simply raise the threshold for qualifying institutions from $1 billion to $3 billion, allowing even more community banks to raise additional capital by issuing debt. In doing so, this bill provides sensible regulatory relief to small financial institutions while also preserving safety and soundness measures, making it easy for small hometown community banks to raise capital and turn it into Main Street jobs and economic growth. Passing this bill will immediately benefit community banks across America. Again, this is not for big banks, this is not for Wall Street, this is for our community banks that focus their attention on the needs of local families, small businesses, and farmers. Mr. Chairman, small businesses are still struggling for access to credit, and the incredible regulatory burden placed on home buyers has complicated the buying process and led to fewer community banks offering mortgages. This is verifiable in the data. The fact that these higher costs are being felt at the same time that paychecks are only just beginning to grow for working families only compounds the problem. But don't take my word for it. Eric, a community banker from Utah, wrote in to tell us that, quote, the ability to help customers and small businesses succeed in rural America has been greatly hampered by regulation intended to, quote unquote, protect the customer from Wall Street banks. But in the process, smaller community banks such as mine have been caught up in the fray of broad brush regulation. Mr. Chairman, in order to keep small businesses alive and well, there needs to be less regulatory burden for all banks, especially smaller community banks like Eric's. According to the Independent Community Bankers of America, community banks like Eric's account for 50% of all small business loans in the U.S. and have $3.3 trillion in loans to consumers and small businesses combined. That is $3.3 trillion worth of mortgage loans for Americans that want desperately to own their very own home, or worked hard and want to start their own business, or have growing families and need loans for unexpected expenses. Mr. Chairman, again, both of these bills will lessen regulatory burden on community banks, but more important, passing these bills will improve the lives of many low and moderate income Americans. I urge all my colleagues to vote in favor of H.R. 1153 and H.R. 4771 two strong bipartisan bills, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify before you, and I will welcome your questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Capuano, we're delighted that you're here, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me. And again, I'd like to add my condolences to Mr. Cole and his staff, again, for the exact same reasons the chairman just said. We're all very close to our staff, and when we lose one, it hurts. Kind of simple. Mr. Chairman, please forgive me as I'm pinch hitting from my ranking member, Ms. Waters, who is more familiar with these bills than I am. I'm familiar with them generally, but not to every detail. On the first one, 1153, the Mortgage Choice Act. Bottom line, what this bill does is that it takes a 3% cap off of cost added to the purchase of a home. In and of itself, that should be sufficient. The purchase of a home is almost always somebody's largest purchase they make. That 3% cap covers everything. As the chairman pointed out, it does not cover unaffiliated expenses. Fair enough. Why did we cover affiliated and not unaffiliated? Very simply because of steering, because of potential fraud, because of collusion between your own company. Of course, you have an incentive to push people into your own companies to make your own profit. That's human nature, and it causes problems, as we have had in the past. One of the biggest problems with this particular bill is there is no cap at all. It just completely exempts them to do whatever they want. I would first always agree that most companies are honest, good companies that are not going to take advantage of consumers. We all get that. No law, no regulation is ever aimed at the good players. It is always aimed at the handful of players on the outside. And this is no different. And if people think that this is not happening, by the way, this particular provision will not change the qualifications to buy a mortgage at all. Not a single person will qualify to get a mortgage in addition to this if it does. But let's just be clear. This particular provision was taken into account in 2015 when Wells Fargo and J.P. Morgan paid over $35 million to redress consumers who were the victims of a scheme in which the bank's loan officers steered homeowners to a particular title company in exchange for cash and other kickbacks. Just last year, Meridian Title Corporation paid over $1 million to redress for illegally steering consumers to an affiliated title insurer. These are problems that exist. If there was an attempt to deal with capping affiliated costs, we'd be open to that. Because again, we all accept the fact that most corporations are good players. It is the exception, but it's an important exception that sticks it to homeowners in a very hard way that they cannot get out of if they get steered to the wrong outside entity. That's why we're opposed to this bill as currently written. As far as 4771 goes, this is, let's be clear, what this does, it allows small banks to take on more debt. In and of itself, on its face, may or may not be a problem, but one exception, one little comment. Just in 2014, in a bipartisan way, we increased it from $500 million to $1 billion. We agreed it was too tight. Let's loosen up, see what happens. That was only a few years ago. There has not been enough time to determine whether that is a good or a bad thing. And let's be clear with that. At $1 billion, I think the number is 87% of all community banks are already covered. They're already allowed to get to this amount in this action. We're only talking about a few more banks. And let's be clear, what's so magic about $3 billion as opposed to $1 billion? The answer is there is no magic to it. We picked the number of $500 million originally. We doubled it because we thought it was too tight. We'd be open to discussions, but here's the problem. A few years ago, we had a bill sponsored by my colleague to raise it to $10 billion. That didn't go anyplace. Then we got a policy statement to increase it to $5 billion. That didn't go anyplace. And then the Trump administration, maybe not a surprise, not one of my favorite administrations, the Trump administration suggested $2 billion. $2 billion. And yet this bill is at $3 billion. In and of itself, there is no inherent reason to pick a specific number because we don't have any data behind it to determine whether this is good or bad. The threat, here's the threat. Most of us claim that we like community banks and we want to see more and more of them. We bewail the fact that community banks are disappearing. If we allow, again, a handful or a bunch of community banks to take on too much debt, they do one of two things. They either go out of business or they become target for purchase at a low dollar price by a bigger bank. And that's exactly what will happen if this provision passes. There will be fewer small community banks. Not all community banks will rush to the door and abuse it. A handful will, and I believe the average community member will be disserved because of that, which is why we oppose this bill at this time. And I will be honestly with you, we will be open to it once we see the impact, the true impact of the $1 billion threshold. But to tell me that President Trump is a crazy anti-business person and only at $2 billion, and we're going beyond that in this bill, that somehow that's some kind of anti-business versus pro-business, that's awfully hard to swallow. We'd like to take it a little slow because we've been through this before, particularly today when we see the stock market go down 1,500 points. If that doesn't scare you, if that doesn't warn you that maybe this economy is a little more shaky than some would like to admit, well, I hope you're right, and I hope my concerns are wrong. Because if we go through this again, those of you who are sitting here loosening all the things we put together after the last crisis will have to explain it to your constituents when the time comes. We're trying to prevent that, to go slow and smart. With that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time.
Mr. Cupp, I want to thank you very much. There's a lot I'd love to engage you on that issue. If numbers don't count, why did you spend so much time making the basis of 1, 2, or 3? We don't have data behind it. And so I would say to you, we'll be responsible for that. We'll gladly take it, because what we've done right now is try to open the market up. As a matter of fact, there's fear now that we might actually hit 5% GDP growth. Oh my gosh, we might be too successful at a time when people said it was crumbs. Didn't matter. Now they're worried about, may grow too fast. I'd sooner take the grow a little bit fast. I hate staying in the same boat I'm in. And I would take success, because I think more people want to be successful in the United States than failures. Now, Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing this bill. IBAT, which is an Associated Independent Bankers Association of Texas, Steve Scurlock, good friend of mine, perhaps you know him, said to me, Pete, this is more than bankers, this is about consumers. We need to be able to serve our local markets. Too many people in our markets, yes, smaller towns, have to get up and load up and go to, dadgummit, go to Dallas. So I said, Steve, I live in Dallas. He said, yeah, but they don't. And this is a consumer issue, not just a bank issue. Sure, it turns into a bank issue. Mr. Chairman, do you want to draw any light on that? Because I'm for the consumers that want to live in the small towns or towns and communities where they choose to go to an independent bank like one that's in Texas that IBAT is associated with.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I know you're very well acquainted with the 5th District of Texas, and you know we have a lot of good folks in East Texas, and they are losing their community financial institutions, and they're losing relationship banking. And yes, many of them don't want to drive the 80 or 90 miles to Dallas to have a banking relationship, only to find out you can't have a relationship with anybody but a computer. And so what is happening, Mr. Chairman, is unfortunately we are losing a community bank or credit union about every other day in America. And they are not perishing of natural causes. They are perishing from the sheer weight, volume, complexity, and expense of the regulatory burden, much of it coming from the Dodd-Frank Act. Now, what we have presented today is, I know that many of my Democrat colleagues don't necessarily agree with everything that we have done in the Financial Choice Act, but there are some areas where they do agree, and I listened very carefully to my friend who serves on the committee when he says, we oppose this and we oppose that. Again, I would note that roughly half the Democrats on our committee supported both of these bills. So maybe one part of the we supported it, but another part of the Democratic we did not support. And so these are very modest bills, Mr. Chairman. But again, we're losing these banks, and as we lose them, people lose their opportunity to buy homes. They lose their opportunity to capitalize a small business. And so now the economy is getting ready, poised to take off, And yet we still have capital that is sitting on the sidelines, and we need to get it into our economy. With respect to the charge that my friend makes about this will lead to fewer small banks, what's leading to fewer community banks is Dodd-Frank. And I will say this, Mr. Chairman, again, since you're very well acquainted with the 5th District of Texas, if we had a financial institution that was going down in Palestine, I would much rather see that it consolidate with Austin Bank out of Jacksonville than to consolidate with J.P. Morgan. Nothing against J.P. Morgan, but the good folks at Austin Bank know East Texas a whole lot better than the folks in J.P. Morgan. What this does is allows the Bank Holding Company Act by Ms. Love, allows smaller banks to be able to compete with larger banks. I'd rather have small banks consolidate than get eaten up by the big banks. And by the way, since Dodd-Frank has passed, the big banks are bigger and the small banks are fewer. And on Mr. Huizinga's bill, Mr. Chairman, all we're asking is if you can get a better rate from an affiliated title insurance company, let's allow the consumer to enjoy that benefit. There's full disclosure. You know, Washington doesn't always know best. And so again, 44 states regulate fees or subject fees to rate approval for title insurance. And some of the horror stories that my colleague points to, they're already illegal. And so when you read the headlines, maybe the law works. Yes, kickbacks are unlawful. Referral fees are unlawful. And if somebody tries it, hopefully they're going to be found, they're going to get busted, and they'll pay the full fine under the law. They'll pay the full civil penalty. So it's good when the law actually works. But consumers ought to have choices. And home buyers ought to have the choice of either using an affiliated or unaffiliated title insurance company. It helps the consumer.
Well, I agree with you. You know, if you know Cad Williams in Palestine, and you do, and you know Jeff Austin that lives up in Frankston probably, and those two can handle somebody that lives out there, that's a whole lot more powerful. And I just agree, and I think that's why Mr. Scurlock said to me, it's not about just my association. It's about the consumers, because they want to do business back home. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome both of our witnesses to the committee. I don't know that I have a lot more in the way of questions, but Mr. Hensling, let me just ask you, you said the Mortgage Choice Act has passed in previous Congresses, one time by voice vote. And then what is the expectation that this time we can get someone in the Senate to pay attention to what seems to be a very reasonable, limited piece of legislation?
Well, Ms. Burgess, I have not made my career off of predicting what the Senate may or may not do. They have found countless ways to disappoint me in the past, but I'm at least hopeful now that perhaps they will act on this. And I will note that they at least have an identical provision with respect to Ms. Love's Bank Holding Company Act. And I know that under Chairman Crapo's leadership that he has been able to put together a strong bipartisan bill that has come out of the committee that I assume will go to the floor hopefully fairly soon, and we will look for opportunities to work with the Senate, and I would hopeful that this points and Ps provision could be a part of that, because indeed in the 113th Congress, it passed by voice vote and had strong support at that time by the ranking member. She has clearly changed her mind. I'm sorry she's not here to explain why.
Well, very well. Thank you both for coming in. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back his time. The gentlewoman from Rochester, New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just more or less want to make a statement that the sponsor of 1153 is quoted saying hardworking families across the nation should not be denied access to a qualified mortgage because of technicalities that are largely out of their control. The goal is to help low and middle income borrowers, as well as prospective first-time homeowners, realize a portion of the American dream by owning their own home. Given the zeal of this administration and the majority in this Congress to take all regulation off of everything, and remembering the awful housing crisis we went through when so many people in this country were given mortgages that they certainly should not have had. I really could not myself support these two bills. And I don't have any in my own district. Banks closing every day. We have none of that at all. They've always been very prudent. Our community banks are wonderful and still are to this day. This does concern me. So I realize that's a personal thing, but I just want to explain why I can't support it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Gentlewoman, you expect time. Judge Hastings, do you seek time?
Mr. Chairman, I do not. I thank both our witnesses. I'll have a lot to say tomorrow when I'm managing.
Well, I look forward to that, and I thank you very much, Judge. Good to see you. The gentleman from Alabama the gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman from sunny, I'm sorry?
Sunnyside.
Sunnyside. I was going to say Sunnydale. I know better than that. I've been there. Sunnyside, Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thought I should engage in this conversation between three Texans. That seems a little lopsided, so.
Gentleman recognized for 45 minutes.
No, I appreciate both of you gentlemen being here and helping us through these two pieces of legislation. So just a question about the timing, I guess. Mr. Capuano, you said something about the last time that the threshold was increased was in 2014, I believe. It was doubled to $1 million. That's 4 years ago. And I just, a thought occurred to me, hasn't that been enough time to see some kind of, what you were looking for proof or evidence that there may be?
It might, and in the meantime, we have fewer banks, and even President Trump thought that going a little slower with $2 billion was a worthwhile thing. I want to be clear, in response to the chairman, I'm not going to pretend these two bills are going to completely undermine the entire financial structure of the world. Yeah. But these two bills taken together are part of the drip, drip, drip of undoing some of the things we've done. Neither one of them are going to, in and of themselves, cause the economic collapse of the universe, but they're not going to help. And that's why even the president took it even slower to $2 billion. But you're right, it was 4 years ago, and that's why we are open to increasing it. But we would like to do it based on some statistical study. Nothing has changed since 2014. Small banks are still closing. We know that, and the chairman just recognized that. Well, if it didn't change then, what makes anybody think it's going to change now? And why is this the number or not? And if this is just a number picked out of the air, which is fine, then say so. And thus far, there has been no statistical analysis as to why this number is any better than any other number.
Right. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, would you have any reaction to that? Have you seen things over the last 4 years lead us to this point?
Well, what has changed is, since this past, we have lost, again, hundreds and hundreds of community banks and credit unions. And I would just point out to the gentleman from Washington and to my colleague, the gentleman from Massachusetts, community banks and credit unions didn't cause the financial crisis. So why are they being punished? And so already we have the concept in law that recognizes that particularly with the regulatory burden, that our community banks are at a disadvantage, and so more debt must be allowed for the ability to have some consolidations. So that's already recognized in law. In fact, the original law, I think, dates back to 1980. And so from time to time, we believe the threshold should be increased, but particularly at a time when we're losing a community bank or credit union every other day in America. And as we do, if you represent any part of rural America, I don't know how you cannot be sensitive to the plight that so many of our constituents are losing their banks and their banking relationship. And so, the question is not so much regulation versus deregulation, but to some extent the question is smart regulation versus dumb regulation. And the burden ought to be on the regulator. That was timely place music, I suppose. Just as I mentioned regulator. And so I don't know why, the gentleman from Massachusetts asked about the statistical analysis. I don't know the statistical analysis underlying the $1 billion threshold. But what I do know is we're losing these institutions, and it's better that community banks consolidate as opposed to being gobbled up by the Wall Street banks. At least that's certainly what I hear from my constituents. And I would note that when it comes to the regulatory burden, when we're just talking about the sheer volume, I think as measured by pages in the Code of Federal Regulations, 6 of the 7 greatest regulatory years took place under the Obama administration. And I think that President Obama may be one of 3, maybe one of 4 presidents that never, ever had 1 year of 3% economic growth, which means millions of Americans were left, if they were lucky enough to have a paycheck, living from paycheck to paycheck. And now, under the policies of this administration, we have finally seen wages start to increase, 2.9%, the greatest increase in a decade, and unemployment remaining at the lowest level in 17 years. And ensuring that we have a smart regulatory burden, not just a voluminous regulatory burden, is part of that success.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I come from a rural district, and I can fully understand exactly what you're saying about the impact to communities and the difficulty for smaller financial institutions, banks and credit unions to survive in this new world since Dodd-Frank. And I hear all the time from them the concerns they have that make it more and more difficult and more for them to do business, but also more and more expensive for their customers, which is, you know, really what we're looking out for here. So the similar question then is for the other bill, the fees and points bill in H.R. 1153. Since that passage of that legislation in 2014, have we seen third parties charge borrowers more for the services that banks could provide or don't get reimbursed for currently?
Well, what we have seen is banks getting out of the mortgage business for a whole host of regulations, principally imposed by the CFPB. The points and fees is one of them. Because on some loans, and I can't quantify it at my fingertips, but under some loans, using the affiliated title insurer, when that is put into the caps and fees formula of the CFPB, that'll kick it over the 3% cap, meaning it's no longer a qualified mortgage, which means incredible liability exposure for the bank. They choose not to make the loan. And so I've got a complete file that's voluminous of community banks and credit unions saying, we're just getting out of the business. And so what we're seeing is, again, fewer and fewer willing to supply those loans. That's harmful. It's harmful on the pricing. It's harmful on the choice for people trying to buy a home.
Okay. That's very helpful. And again, representing a rural district, that's very important for consumers to be able to still have available to them the mechanisms they need to be able to purchase a home. So. Well, I appreciate very much both of you being here. Thank you for answering my questions and shedding some light on this. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentlewoman from Wyoming does not seek time. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and Michael for taking time to not only come to the Rules Committee. I want to thank your counsel here. Mr. Edgar's here, Mr. Blum is here, and your adult supervision. Ms. Lackey is here, and I want to thank them for taking time to make sure that I was updated not only on the importance of this bill, but the great work that you continue to do at Financial Services. And you're not gone yet, but I want to say this, that it has been a distinct pleasure to see your extreme leadership on behalf of consumers. And I'm very proud of that, and I want to thank them for keeping me up to date with the advantages of the heavy work that you have been undertaking this year, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay, we're now going to ask if there's any other member that would seek to give testimony to H.R. 1153 or 4771. Would you seek to give testimony to 1153 or 4771? Seeing that, that there's no member that would seek time. This closes the hearing portion of what would be a presentation by the Committee on Financial Services. The committee now would open up testimony for H.R. 772, the Common Sense Nutrition Disclosure Act of 2017. We welcome the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, and the distinguished gentleman from the Wildcat from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie. Previously, I have provided information to you that without objection, anything you brought to the committee in writing would enable our awesome stenographer the ability to finish off the testimony properly. She speaks Texan, but also a little bit from Kentucky, Brett, so you'll find that she's very able to articulate. And you have a great friend up here. You cheated and had a Wildcat waiting for you. Yeah, we did all right. Yeah, we did okay. Okay. Well, Jan can hold her own. Jan can hold her own. Gentleman's recognized. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I do love the Wildcats, but I'm also a hilltopper first, right? You know what that is. And I have a daughter that lives in Schakowsky's city and goes to school in her city, so kind of connected here today, right? So thanks a lot, and I do want to share comments earlier. Mr. Cole's Chief of Staff, Mr. Murphy, that passed away, and our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family. I am substituting for Kathy McMorris Rogers, so H.R. 772, the Common Sense Nutrition Disclosure Act. Not Tom, it's staff, Chief of Staff. Chief of Staff, yeah, Chief of Staff. Sorry.
I'm sorry. We'll explain this real quickly, and I'm sorry you did come in a few minutes ago, but Tom Cole's Chief of Staff, John Murphy, back in Oklahoma, passed away this morning. And it's a tremendous loss. He passed away of natural causes. And so we expressed our sympathy, not only for his family, but for Tom's staff. And yes, ma'am. So, gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. Again, I'm substituting for Miss Kathy McMorris Rogers. H.R. 772, the Common Sense Nutrition Disclosure Act, is a bipartisan legislation introduced by Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers and Tony Cardenas to amend the Food and Drug Administration's menu labeling rule issued in November 2014. This legislation passed out of the Energy and Commerce Committee with a bipartisan vote of 39-14. The goal of the bill is to make the implementation of nutrition disclosure law useful for consumers and workable for food service establishments. H.R. 717 was drafted to address the challenges of an overly prescriptive one-size-fits-all menu labeling regulation that affects a diverse industry. We need to ensure this law works for all food establishments. Convenience stores, supermarkets, and pizza shops will have significant challenges complying with the regulation as written. This bill, however, will provide regulated entities with the flexibility they need to comply without compromising consumers' access to nutrition information. The Common Sense Nutrition Act will establish more reasonable standard for federal regulation and allow nutrition information to be provided by a remote access menu for establishments where the majority of orders are placed off premises. This legislation also takes steps to preserve local foods and fresh items that may be sold at just a few locations. To do so, the bill clarifies that menu labeling regulations are intended for standard menu items defined as those items with substantially the same recipe, prepared in substantially the same way, with substantially the same food components that are routinely included on a menu or menu board, or routinely offered as a self-service food or food on display at 20 or more locations. This legislation provides clear guidance to small business owners, ensuring compliance, and at the same time delivering critical nutritional information for all Americans. This bipartisan piece of legislation passed the House last Congress with a bipartisan vote of 266 to 144. And I yield.
Thank you very much. Ms. Schakowsky, welcome. We're delighted that you're with us. And if the gentlewoman, please make sure she gets that green light on. That will help us on that microphone to be able to hear her. Thank you very much.
Well, I strongly oppose H.R. 772, the so-called Common Sense Nutrition Disclosure Act, and urge the committee not to advance what I think is harmful legislation. The menu labeling law that was passed in 2010 requires chain restaurants with 20 or more locations to provide consumers with basic nutrition information for standard food and beverage items on the menu. That would include calorie count. And since then, the FDA has been working to implement this rule, only to face numerous delays along the way. Researchers have shown that calorie information can help people make healthier choices, and 80% of Americans support providing this type of calorie information on the menu. Just an aside, I would say, this is just my thought, that if we were the majority women in this Congress, that this bill would be implemented by now. And did you know that married men actually live longer than single men because women often make sure they go to the doctor and eat healthy? And in a way, that's what this is about. But far from common sense, the legislation we're considering today is unnecessary, overly prescriptive, and would deny consumers critical information about the food that they eat. At a time when our country is facing an obesity epidemic, we should not be undermining efforts to educate consumers about the nutritional value of foods. As a country, we are paying a high price for obesity. It's estimated that the medical cost for obesity tops $190 billion annually. Childhood obesity is responsible for $14 billion in direct medical costs, and obesity-related medical costs are also expected to rise significantly to reach $549.5 billion over the next 2 decades. We should be embracing efforts to reduce this enormous cost to our health care system. A Harvard study found restaurant menu labeling could prevent up to 41,000 cases of childhood obesity and could save over $4.6 billion in health care costs over the next 10 years. But instead, H.R. 772 takes us backward. It undermines and further delays consumer protection. First, it would allow food establishments to display calorie information in ways that would only serve to confuse and mislead consumers. It allows the food establishment to set arbitrary serving sizes and cut the calorie count way below what a normal person may eat. Without standardized calorie reporting for menu items, people will have a tough time comparing nutritional information across items. This is opposed to the original menu labeling law, where posting the total calories for the whole menu item would be required. It's deceptive to label an entree or a muffin, for example, as multiple servings, because we all know that they are mostly consumed by one person at one sitting. You know, you can't have a muffin calorie count saying, well, that's really 8 servings for a muffin or 5 servings for a muffin. Second, it would deny consumers the opportunity to view calorie information and other nutritional information regardless of how or where they purchase food from a chain restaurant. Not only does it allow deceptive service size manipulation, this bill would allow food establishments to make that information difficult to find. Calorie labeling is not useful if it is posted somewhere that it will not be seen. Provisions in this bill would deny customers nutritional information from not only inside a pizza chain, but inside fast food and other chain restaurants if the majority of their orders are placed off-site, like on the telephone or online. For example, under this bill, a restaurant or similar retail food establishment could have the option to only list the nutritional information online or via some other remote access menu, thereby denying customers who order in a brick-and-mortar location access to that information. Speed limits are not useful if they are hidden on a highway, and calorie counts cannot help if they are concealed from the public. And finally, it's been nearly 8 years since the original menu labeling requirements were passed, but this bill would once again face delay and the final menu labeling rules and send FDA back to the drawing board. The FDA has already put forth proposed rules, solicited comments, worked with stakeholders to finalize this menu labeling rule. In fact, just this past November, FDA published new draft guidance intended to help answer any outstanding questions regarding compliance. This rule has been delayed long enough. The final menu labeling regulation should go into effect as scheduled in May of this year. Countless businesses, restaurants, and other retail food establishments have already invested time and money into complying with the current menu labeling requirements, and it would be irresponsible to further delay implementation of this important rule. This bill is another handout to businesses and an affront to consumers. It will keep us consumers in the dark about the nutrition information they need and create consumer and industry confusion. H.R. 772 would weaken an important tool intended to help Americans make informed food choices at a time when obesity and other nutrition-related health problems are at crisis levels. And that's why countless consumer and public health organizations oppose this bill, including the American Cancer Society, the Cancer Action Network, the American Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association, the American Nurses Association, the Center for Science and the Public Interest, Consumers Union, and the Trust for American Health. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I thank you, and I yield back.
Ms. Kowski, thank you very much. Walked 82,000 steps last week. I generally walk about 82,000 steps. I try and stay healthy. I try and do the best I can, but if I want to go get something from a pizza shop, by God, I'm going to do it. My wife may not always agree with me. Probably doesn't. But when I'm with her, I do the right thing. But, you know, I go to some places, and I feel good about it. I drink iced tea. I don't drink beer. Wish I could. But that's not my point. I like to go and do what I want to do, and I try and balance what I do between my own safety and my own desires and what I want to do. But some of the pizza places that I go to, I think would have a tough time. And I spent time in one of them, and they explained to me, they really want to provide a bar that's out there, but they don't know all the mixing and matching that you can do, because I'm allowed to do what I want to do when I go to a bar. A pizza, a salad bar. And that's the place that I go to probably once or twice a week, during the summer mostly. I think you're doing the right thing. And I think that Ms. Schakowsky talked about it. It took them 7 years to come up with what the answer was going to be. And it doesn't fit for everybody. And I think that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to make it fit for a few more people. I see nothing wrong with somebody wants to go post, as long as it's factually correct. They can go post and do anything they want to and work off the final, or what might be the final standard, or the standard that they believe is best. But I also believe we ought to do the right thing, because I think there's something about running your own small business, and there's something about running a chain where you can provide good food, and then it's up to the consumer. I just think that it's endless to be able to worry about whether it's ranch dressing and how many calories that is on my salad or on my beets or my corn or whatever I do. So I've heard from people about this, and I'm glad we're here doing this. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, you can.
You can choose anything you want. The issue is, if you really are trying to control your weight and you're worried about it, knowing that information can really be helpful in making the choice. You talked about dressings. Okay, so maybe the balsamic vinaigrette is less calories than the
Ranch. I like ranch.
Okay, you know what, or not. But no one is forcing you to do anything. You might want to know that that large
But
order.
we would be forcing them to know what I was going to put on my plate. And all I'm saying is,
No.
maybe my avocado ranch might be more. I don't know. But that's what I want. And I'm just
And,
saying.
and you absolutely should get it, but you might want to know that that large order of fries is 750 calories
didn't
or
admit
800.
to that,
Or
Jan.
not.
I did not admit to that.
But you know what I'm saying? I mean,
I
this,
do.
this is about informing you about the choices
But you
that
see,
could
that's a
affect your
different
health.
matter. To get a French fry is different than the salad bar. And I think the salad bar, I think some of the problems that they have is the food that is available, of adding it all up, they don't know all the combinations and it didn't necessarily fit them. And I think it's easy when you provide a plate. You know what is on the plate, you know the serving, you know generally what it is. I heard that they need some flexibility, and I think that's what this is about. Yeah, well, you would know better than I, sir.
Well, I agree, I'm one that, you now see menu boards that are listed, and you walk in and go, wow, I didn't realize, and I've made some changes in my decision what I was gonna eat because of what I
agree.
saw. So I think that I appreciate that. And I think that information is important, and what this is trying to do is get to where you are. It doesn't get rid of the menu labor requirements. There was questions of that when we first started out. The question is, you have chain restaurants that have standard menu boards. You walk in, and you could see probably 80% of the chain restaurants in America, or even more, you can walk in and say, well, that's simple. It's simply
My
done.
Chili's has it right on there for me.
But exactly. But then you have what we found, and I think some of the struggling of getting these regulations implemented is, how do you deal with a pizza place that has 34 million different combinations? How do you deal with there's a grocery store near my home that I go to quite often, has coffee here, and Subway in the corner, and another place, they have different foods throughout. And those are the questions that we're just trying to clarify. And the other one was to deal with the pizza. And some people will say, well, you carved out pizza specifically, but that one just seems to be highly remotely ordered. I think, I guess last night was the #1 pizza day in America, I think.
Right.
Remotely ordered.
I never
and
even went to the place.
You never see the play. And then, so those are, how can you deal with those combos? Well, if you have it online, not on we write on a board, you can pick, I've got this or this cheese, this dough, this whatever, and it gives you the count. So the issue is not to get away with the calorie requirements. Like I said, I have used that as myself to make some decisions about what I eat, but it's to make it more practical and more reasonable.
I actually appreciate people that tell me fat content and calories. I do. All I've said is, at some point, maybe it doesn't fit on everybody. And the one that I'd give you is where I go get my pizza, because I walked in there and I wasn't worried about it, and somebody knew I was in there and they came and talked to me. So, guilt by association, Jan. I like being a consumer, and I like to get my pizza. So I saw the common sense that lay beside this. And if you want to walk into Chili's and they have to provide all this, and they have a regular plate, and they've calculated and they know what it is, I'm every bit for it. I am for that. And I do believe obesity is one of the biggest problems that we have. But I think if you're trying to provide good, clean food, you shouldn't get held responsible just because you didn't calculate all the calculations of a salad bar. And that's what I believe. I am very concerned. My physician's Dr. Kenneth Cooper. He invented the word aerobics. Dr. Cooper in Dallas, Texas, is more concerned about obesity than any person I know of, because he looks at our children and he sees the numbers, and it's staggering of the cost that we have.
And diabetes as well.
Oh, absolutely. But there comes a responsibility with this, and so I support the food labeling. I support these things. I also support making some common sense, too. So I'll probably end up voting for this thing with a smile. I thank both of you for being here, the gentleman from Louisville, Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to both of our witnesses. As both of you know, we've had this in front of our subcommittee and our full committee on more than one occasion over the past couple of years. Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask unanimous consent the statement of administration policy be made part of the record.
Without objection.
The President's advisors do say if H.R. 772 were presented to the President in its current form, his advisors would recommend that he sign the bill. And I think, the thing that has come up over and over again is the definition of reasonable basis to allow for normal variations in serving size, inadvertent human error. We shouldn't criminalize the placement of pepperoni on a pizza. I mean, that is really, to me, it's as simple as that. I know we've had this discussion many, many different ways, but I am in support of the legislation. I thank you all for bringing it today. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much.
I'm glad I got back in time.
Perfect timing, Louise.
Because, Pete, it's like this. We want you to be happy and eat whatever you want. But there are so many millions of Americans with heart trouble, things where they have to watch the sodium that they eat and other things. And it shouldn't really hamper you in any way if we had those labels on their food.
It shouldn't hamper me, but what are the criminal penalties? What are the penalties for this?
The FDA said that they are going to enforce, this is all, there will not be criminal.
All just natural compliance. If you want to comply, you need to, so if somebody
There's
chooses not
criminal
to.
penalties. There are criminal penalties.
There are criminal
This
penalties.
is an educational rule, am I right about that? And they're not going to.
No penalty.
No
They're not
criminal
gonna be criminal
penalties.
Is that right?
What, to the producers, is that?
Well, the underlying law
Let's
has,
let Jan give us the answer.
Okay, the answer is, they're gonna focus on education and compliance and give them time to get this all right. So this
Criminal
is about-
penalties are in the
Will
law?
there be
Yes.
overtime? Okay.
Oh, criminal penalties. That's another
Oh,
problem
for
I've
printing
got.
a label?
Criminal penalties for not following the law.
And those penalties are persons
Criminal.
who are selling the food, is that?
the provider and the seller.
Honestly, almost everything I buy has the label on it already.
Yeah, I agree with that, but that's why we're saying criminal penalties. That's the problem.
And I read it too. I mean, frankly,
ma'am.
that's important to me.
When you go out,
Yeah.
increasingly, people get their food out, that they
Right.
order in, or they go to a restaurant, and that would be
Yeah.
what it is.
Is it, maybe it's a New York law or something, but if you go to a McDonald's at the airport, they've got the label up on the wall, big print, so you can read it. Is that maybe just,
Non-compliance is criminal. Getting it wrong is criminal. And what we want to
Well,
say in
well,
this
what- but
is,
if you were going to save somebody's life a little bit, Pete, it wouldn't,
but
it
here's,
might be important. And I'm sure that the reason they put the labeling on in the first place is for health reasons, so that people can understand that what they're eating may do them harm.
Gentlewoman,
So
you,
I would think it's a price of doing business and not wanting to harm people, that the people who should do that labeling should do that labeling.
Gentlewoman yield.
Sure.
So what we're saying is, tell me I'm not right and give me 90 days to fix it, and I'll fix it.
That's what so currently,
That's all it is.
you could be criminally charged. So if you had somebody put too many pepperonis on a pizza and gets outside of what the menu labeled, the franchise owner could go to prison. And we keep talking about how many people are in federal prisons and about everything we talk about. So for menu label, you could go to federal prison. What we're saying is, if you find a violation, give them 90 days to fix it in this bill.
That's all. Thank you.
One of the things that it was enforced the same way as on packaged foods. In other words, you have to have
On
unpackaged
packaged food.
what you look
And
for.
canned foods, yes.
That's how it would be enforced, but they would also have time to cover.
I don't know why we ever object to giving people information.
Hello.
That's really, we have a population that could use a lot more. And it's just the idea of not doing that, it's troubling to me, because I do know a lot of people, those labels mean sickness and health with them.
I'm completely there. Packaged foods are packaged foods. I'm talking about a consumer-directed decision may not fit exactly what their board said. And
Well-
that's the fight. I mean, that's really the fight here.
I'd rather take the nutritionist or maybe the doctors than the consumers.
Yes, ma'am.
But it's up to the consumer. If they want to just eat french fries, it's okay with me. But
As
I'd
long as
like
they
them,
know.
I'd like them to know what the risk is.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't see any problem at all with telling them that. I yield back.
That's common sense, Louise. I don't have a problem with that at all either. Gentlewoman shields back her time. The gentleman from Alabama
So are you okay?
does not seek time. The gentleman from Massachusetts. Jim, how you doing? You're with Louise. Judge,
Sure, Mr. Chairman.
you seek time?
Yes, I think so.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have two brand-new staff. First, I thank Mr. Guthrie and Ms. Schakowsky for their testimony. I have two new staffers, Katrina Martell and Tony Matthews, that prepared questions for me for this hearing, and I just offer them up, not asking immediately for a response from either of you, but to show you how fresh eyes come at matters. Instead of passing another law, shouldn't the next step be addressing illiteracy and poverty rates in low-income communities so that the benefits of nutritional labeling already in place can be accessible to everyone? They go on to say, under H.R. 772, are food establishments held accountable for their egregious actions when they knowingly advertise limited, missing, and/or mislabeling information that hurts public health? And then they say, why are we wasting time trying to pass H.R. 772, which would cause further delays implementing nutrition labeling, all while public health is declining and obesity is rising? And this is key, and I would ask a response from you, Mr. Guthrie. For restaurants already in compliance, won't passing additional changes in H.R. 772 actually increase, not lessen, the economic burden by changing and confusing the law? Is she a new staffer or an old staffer?
Oh, not old, she's young, but she's not new. She's just verifying so people who've already complied, we're not taking away the requirement that you provide calorie information. That's not what this does. But there's people who've already complied, they're not going to add any new expenses. They can comply the way that they've applied. The issue that we've seen as it's moved forward, trying to address, I know that Mrs. Morse-Rogers has worked on this closer than I have. It's hers and Tony Cardenas's bill. But my understanding from the people who they talk with, it's mostly supermarkets. It's the non-standard. The chains who have standard meals, provide standard things, it's easy to comply with this. The issue is when you have pizza places with 34 million different combinations, when you have, I think the chairman talked about salad bars, that when the consumer puts so much on a plate that it's hard for the establishment. And so it doesn't.
The consumer pile, if you have up there that it's 1,000 calories and the consumer goes and piles on as much as they want to, that's exercising Chairman Sessions' prerogative. But at least they know it's 1,000 calories.
Well, so like with pizza, you'd have to follow the law as it's written. You would have to show the calorie count for essentially every combination that's possible. And that's what we're saying. Let's just make it more common sense. Most of the menus now you see brackets for that.
Yeah.
But the other thing on the about if somebody intentionally mislabels, you have to be acting under the bill within good faith to not face the criminal. So I know that was one of the questions you asked in the order as well. So if you're not acting in good faith, you're not exempt from the criminal penalty.
Right. I could answer the cheese Paula thing. Lettuce is this, tomatoes is that, cheese is this, and bread is that, and you go on about your business. If they were to label it that way, I don't see that as all that challenging. But I do have a very pertinent question, I believe, that is raised by the Congressional Budget Office as to the cost estimate. And I lift from this particular measure from September of 2017, this paragraph. CBO estimates that those modifications would take several years to fully implement because they would significantly change the current regulation. CBO expects the Federal Drug Administration would have to develop and publish a new regulation and additional guidance to comply with modifications. Using information from FDA, CBO estimates that the agency would need about 9 additional employees in each of the first 2 years to develop and publish the regulations, and about 5 additional employees each year from 2020 to 2022 to implement the regulations, including engaging with affected stakeholders. CBO estimates an average annual cost per employee of about $290,000 across the 2018 to 2022 window. That estimate accounts for the effects of inflation. On that basis, CBO estimates that implementing those activities would cost FDA $8 million over 2018 to 2022. Do you concur with that analysis?
Well, the score, as you said, on the time said another 7 years. It was amended in committee to ensure that FDA had 1 year to move forward with that requirement. So the bill requirement requires it to be implemented within a year, the rule. The rule to be established.
So what about the cost?
Well,
That the secretary still has discretion.
The gentleman
Yeah,
controls it.
we believe there's a minimal cost in
All
complying
right,
with this.
Ms. Chakowski.
The secretary still has discretion on how long it would take to implement the legislation.
Right. I do, Mr. Chairman, ask unanimous consent to include in the record a letter from August 2nd, 2017, of nonprofit groups to Commissioner Gottlieb on menu labeling. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you. And Ms. Chakowski put in her testimony several of the organizations that oppose this particular measure, and I won't reiterate them, but I do highlight the American Institute for Cancer Research and the American Cancer Society Action Network and the American Diabetes Association and American Heart Association. There are 40 plus others, but those people don't play. I mean, when they put their name on something, they have given some pretty careful analysis, as I'm sure members of the Commerce Committee have as well. But obviously, there is a collision. Additionally, I ask unanimous consent to include a letter from the National Restaurant Association opposing this measure, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
And then back in 2015, it appears that Dunkin' Donuts, who are now Dunkin', had one of their representatives appear before the subcommittee in Commerce. And I thought it particularly illuminating that she said that today her testimony would focus on key issues, and that is the need for consistent nutrition labeling on all restaurant-type foods, coverage of chain restaurants and similar retail food establishments, and the determination of which store materials should include calorie and/or nutrition information. And I thought she did a bang-up analysis, but came to the conclusion that they support nutrition labeling for restaurant-type food establishments and believe menu labeling is simply the right thing to do. I don't know about you all, but I go to a lot of food establishments, And over the course of time, coming from childhood where nothing was labeled to the labeling process that has taken place over time, I rather enjoy knowing that the caloric content, the protein and the carbohydrates and the fat. I enjoy that. I would suspect that there are countless other people that do as well. And with that in mind, if you use a place like a McDonald's or Burger King or Papa John's Pizza, when they label something and they put it there, then I have that choice as a citizen to exercise my prerogative with reference to it. But knowing that it's there over the course of time has been particularly helpful to me in choosing my own undertakings as I go about seeking what I want to eat. Additionally, the American Association for Justice, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent.
That objection will enter that
To
in the record, too,
include
Judge.
their record, which is of more recent vintage. It's February 2018, and they oppose this as well. I'll have an opportunity to speak about it on the floor tomorrow, and Mr. Guthrie, I know, among other things, you and Ms. Schakowsky to be particularly thoughtful members, and I do appreciate both of your statements. But let me tell you something I don't appreciate, and neither of you are responsible. If Dr. Burgess had not admitted the administration policy, I would have. If anybody sees the President of the United States, I know I won't, but those of you that do, tell him to get over it. Obama ain't the president no more. And he is. And he has exacting responsibilities. In this particular matter, we are here talking about nutrition. And while Obamacare or health care plays a significant role in it, his analysis is totally out of sync with what I believe the intent of this legislation is. So I'm glad it's in the record. And the sooner he learns, and the rest of you, that you have the responsibility to exercise your repeal and replacement. But please know that it is the responsibility of the Republicans, it is the responsibility of this president to undertake all these measures. And as I said, Obama is not the president anymore. And the sooner you all get to that, the better off this country is going to be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Judge. By the way, to answer our questions on page 3 and page 4 are very concrete. This is only a 10-page bill. Very concrete example, and the difference is the standard that was offered for sale as opposed to the standard of what a reasonable serving might be. And when it's prepared and given to you, as opposed to you preparing it for yourself, is all that we're trying to get to. I read the bill myself. One is served, and then I know what it is, but when you're serving yourself, I'm not sure exactly what it is. So it offers a chance for a reasonable number of calories that would be, if you, by and large, I guess if they put a picture of a salad bowl up there, and then the individuals, if you put balsamic, it's this much. If you put ranch, it's this much. If you add an extra tomato. The way I get out of this is, I'm glad we're doing something, but I look at it not for aggregate, but what of the total daily content. That's the way I read it. I'm not a wife who wants to know, did you realize how many calories you got? No, ma'am. I simply looked at, today I had 82% of whatever I was supposed to have, and that's kind of the way I look at it. But I think this is pretty easily straightforward. The difference is whether you served yourself, or whether I serve you. And that's the difference, the way I read it. See if you can help us out, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really don't have any questions, but I'd just like to say that have been a co-sponsor of this legislation. I think it is a common sense way to allow different establishments that sell food to be able to present nutritional information to consumers in an easy to understand way and easy for them to comply with. So in the spirit of giving consumers as much information as they need, I think this is a good step in that direction. And again, I have no questions, but fully support the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Colorado. Gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman from Colorado, Windsor, Colorado, Mr. Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try to be brief, but I wanted to try to bond with Ms. Schakowsky because there are some times where we disagree about issues, but I think nutrition is an important issue. This morning, before I got on the plane and traveled to the swamp, I made myself a juice. 32 ounces of organic kale, green kale, purple kale, spinach, carrots, green apple, and tomato. And the government didn't tell me to put a single one of those ingredients in that juice. I did it all by myself. And I think if we are actually going to solve the nutrition problem that we both have great concern about in this country, it's going to come from personal accountability and not because the government, one, informs us of nutrition, or two, tells us what we should do. In Mr. Polis's hometown, which I was in Saturday night for a dinner, I reminded the folks at the dinner that in Boulder, Colorado, the city government tells them what type of light bulb they need to put in their public buildings. If they just look 20 miles to the east, that's where my district is, they can see Freedom, where the government doesn't really care what kind of light bulbs we have or what kind of food we eat. And why it's so important for me to mention this in this particular committee, I had the honor of going to Dallas a few months ago and sharing time with my good chairman, Pete Sessions. And the people there were wonderful. And again, we ate very healthy. And after having dinner with his wife and talking about my juice routine, she went out and bought the chairman a juicer. So the chairman of the Rules Committee owns a juicer, has used a juicer, and while he talks about pizza, the secret in his very dark closet is that he drinks kale juice on a regular basis. And I just wanted to make sure that America knew about that. So thank you both for your testimony today.
With my colleague yield very briefly.
Absolutely.
You got on the plane with your juicer. My lady friend has been on the South Beach diet, but she wasn't consistent with it. So this morning I decided to bring some of the South Beach diet for yours truly. Mm-hmm. I want you to know the government can interfere from time to time. They took it from me.
Dadgum TSA.
Thank you.
Oh, no.
But the gentleman yield?
I will yield.
The gentleman didn't mention Cadillac Jack Vaughn. You met Cadillac Jack, too, in Dallas.
I did. It was an honor.
Yeah, it was an honor. And we all juice. I thought juicing for a long time meant like Lyle Alzado or one of those guys where you did something with some concoction, but it actually is healthy.
And I yield back, Mr.
Gentleman yields back some. The gentlewoman from Wyoming.
I don't juice, Mr. Chairman, but
You don't need to. You're perfect.
yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I too, though, want to second something Ms. Schakowsky said, and I am all for women running the world. I think that that's something we can agree on. I thought that one of the most inspiring ads in the Super Bowl last night was Michaela Schifrin, and the symbol that she has on her helmet as she skis. She's I believe, the youngest alpine skier in Olympic history, champion. And she has a message on her helmet that says ABFTTB, which stands for Always Be Faster Than the Boys. And I think that's a good lesson for all of us. But I would just say it's important as we're thinking through these things to remember that women aren't just the consumers, that women are also the small business owners, women are also the restaurant owners. And it's very important that we recognize the burden that these regulations have across the board on men and women. And I think that while all of us want to do what's best, I do think that government has had a very heavy hand, and we need to look for ways that we can make sure that women and men are able to take care of their families the way they want to, and frankly, are relieved from some of the just very heavy-handed burden of regulation that we've seen, particularly in the last 8 years. And that's one of the reasons that I support this bill. I think it's important for us to recognize we're not saying people don't have the obligation to label, but we are removing a real burden that's been an economic burden across the board, not just on consumers, but also on the small business owners who very often are women. And with that, I don't have any questions, but I will also not admit to eating Big Macs or anything else in the middle of this hearing and yield back.
Joanne yields back her time. Mimi, we talked about a lot of stuff today, and you're a healthcare guru. I hope you saw that we kicked around a big issue and that your favorite congresswoman led the fight of really of trying to make sure we better get the message. Let's be healthy. Okay, I've been handed a sheet of paper from an organization called Yum. It's a Dunkin' brand, and it's a letter that I've been asked to enter into the record, so without objection, I'll do that. And it's a letter that says, we do have remaining concerns with the legislation. But I'll enter that to the record, and we'll let us see what we can do with that. Any other member have anything to say to our panel? I want to thank both of you for taking time. Jan, you bring a lot of fun to this. You did well enough to get invited back, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other member that would seek to give testimony to H.R. 772? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 772, and the chairman will be in receipt of a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 772, the Common Sense Nutrition Disclosure Act of 2017, a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate
Excuse me,
equally divided.
Gentlemen, suspend just a moment, please. Gentlemen may continue.
Equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment of the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Energy and Commerce, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 1153, the Mortgage Choice Act of 2017, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides one motion to recommit. Section 3 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 4771, the Small Bank Holding Company Relief Act of 2018, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 1115-57 be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 4 of the rule waives the requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 for a 2/3 vote to consider a report from the Committee on Rules on the same day it is presented to the House with respect to any resolution reported through the legislative day of February 9, 2018. Finally, Section 5 of the rule provides that it shall be in order any time on the legislative day of February 8th, 2018, or February 9th, 2018, for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules as though under Clause 1 of Rule 15, and that the Speaker or his designee shall consult with the minority leader or her designee on the designation of any matter for consideration pursuant to this section.
We're supposed to leave on this.
You've now heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Louisville, Texas. Is there amendment or discussion? The gentlewoman and I were just
Yes.
trying to get closer on this, and the gentlewoman's
Oh,
recommendation.
thank you. I just want to comment again, these are two more closed rules. I'm not sure why they're closed. It's three closed rules.
I can
No,
tell
just
you
two.
why.
Yeah.
There were no amendments.
But you know what, Pete? There should be a statute of limitation on some of these bills. When you're taking up 5-year-old bills, the Senate won't touch. And
Well,
we've got so much, the CR comes due this week, and
but the gentlewoman understands more than most in this
Mm-hmm.
body that when we open up a provision, a section of law,
Mm-hmm.
and we ask people ahead of time, would anybody like to amend this bill? The bill is very structured in a very specific way. But when you have an open rule, you open up that whole section, and it means that we could open up things
sure
that
we
were not
could.
even intended, and then, on top of that, we can't even get out on time
as
to
I
get you
recall
where
it.
you want to go.
As I recall it, you asked for amendments.
We
and
did.
give people a time to do it. But it's still, nonetheless, I think.
Well, these are bipartisan
The idea
piece
for
of
the open
legislation.
rules
These
is
are
always
bi-
that people could make amendments on the day of the debate.
Well, it opens up, but it opens up more than just,
So we'd have debate then. Well, of course, it'd have to
I'm
be
for that.
germane.
I'm for that. All I'm saying is,
Right.
we view these were a bipartisan piece of legislation. We view.
And they couldn't be improved any further. Well, I can't agree with that.
But if they want to be improved, as opposed to open up the entire section of the law, then that's what the amendment process is for.
Okay, all right, let's see what we're about
Yes,
to do
ma'am.
about the CR.
Yes, ma'am.
What do we know about it?
Well, I'll tell you what we know. I think we're going to be able to come to some agreement tonight. There's still negotiation, as you know.
Who's doing my side is not involved in that.
Is that right?
I'm asking, I don't know.
Okay.
If you're
I-
going to
in
come to
my
an agreement
opinion,
tonight, that's your meeting.
I was at a leadership meeting this afternoon.
Uh-huh.
And there was no specific point about we're dealing with a person or that person. There were extraneous matters about dealing with spending levels, where there are bipartisan discussions, and it is a bipartisan discussion. And they did not know whether that was going to be, would be finished in time to fit, so we held it. So the CR is pretty much understood. It's the discussions about can we finalize the big discussions to put them in there, because as you and I know, the spending cap issue, in my opinion, is also a sticking point between our two parties.
Yes, it is.
Yes, ma'am, it is. And so I think that the question is that going to be in there? And there are discussions about that. So I think I can look at you and say, yes, ma'am, I believe there is discussion, some extraneous to that, but that could fit in, and those discussions not finished necessarily to put it in.
So we wait. Okay, I know you have.
But we
martial law.
have a
What-
push on us.
Debt limit
We have
is
to get this
also,
done.
I understand from
I
Treasury,
think that's another issue that is being discussed, actively
as
discussed.
part of the CR.
It's being actively discussed. I think if I were guessing, you and I figured out this is not going to be the final CR, unfortunately.
But this is the fifth one.
I voted for every one of them.
That's awful way to run the United States of America. You wanted to.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me yield to you.
I just, for the record, when we talk about open rules, I mean, you made it sound like all chaos would break loose.
We
But I
had
just want to
one.
be clear
We
that
forgot.
if you open up a rule, germaneness rules still apply unless the Rules Committee were to waive those. And so, it's perfectly responsible and perfectly reasonable that we could open up these bills and, work our way through them. It may take a little bit longer, but that's called regular order, which is something we haven't seen in a long, long time. And I would hope at some point we get back to it. But I don't want anyone to misunderstand what an open rule is. It's not it's not a green light for chaos. It's basically allows people to offer germane amendments to the bill and try to make it better, if they so desire. And maybe nobody has an amendment. And wouldn't that be nice to have an open rule and at least give people the opportunity? If they want to take advantage of it, they can. If not, they don't have to. But anyway, just wanted to clarify that for the record.
Well, look, I could have several responses. What I would say to you is I think what we're trying to do is look at regular order, that it went through the committee. There was a hearing. Both these had a hearing. Both these had votes. Both these had markups. Both these had ideas, and that's pretty regular order to me. Judge? Okay, seeing none. The vote will now be on the motion from the gentleman from Louisville, Texas. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, the ayes have it.
We'd like a roll
Oh, the
call on
gentlewoman would
that,
like a
please.
roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess. Aye. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins. Aye. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne. Aye. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse. Aye. Mr. Buck. Mr. Buck. Aye. Ms. Cheney. Ms. Cheney. Aye. Ms. Slaughter.
No.
Ms. Slaughter. No. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern. No. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings. No. Mr. Polis. Mr. Polis. No. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman. Aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to, and accordingly, the gentleman from Windsor Freedom, Colorado, well, Mr. Buck will be handling this,
Congressman Hastings from Florida.
and Judge Hastings will be handling this from Florida. Thank you very much. Judge, do you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, when are we meeting next?
Judge, thank you very much. We expect to be asked to meet tomorrow to ensure government funding is ahead of Thursday's deadline, so I will ask each of you to please stay flexible. I'm aware that your party would like to have its retreat. You're entitled to a retreat. We're trying the best we can to stay on target and get you there and get you back. And we appreciate Don is talking to Steve about the accommodations that need to be made. And the gentlewoman knows when the Senate is going through their process, we'll see it, it's on TV, proper notification will be given to you so that then you can make a decision about getting back closer to town. And we need to be careful. We learned last week, can't take anything for granted.
No, while we're thinking about that, this is the third train wreck in 2 weeks. Loss of life, 116 people taken to the hospital. Sometime, instead of these old bills, we really need to talk about the state of the infrastructure.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr.
Thank you
Chairman,
very-
would you
Yes.
yield to me?
Yes, sir.
We should also take up the appointment, or the Senate should take up the appointment of the Federal Railroad Association nominee that has been stymied since July of this year. And nothing was more infuriating than to sit out there trying to resuscitate someone who was hurt in a train wreck, and we don't even have a confirmed nominee. It's a shameful act that the Senate has done. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I would like to
Wait a
add,
minute, the Senate is confirming somebody? Is that what you
it has not
Well,
since July,
that,
a nominee.
that's a Republican issue, isn't it? I mean, my party's not in charge over there.
Well-
I don't blame you, I'll join you in being angry about
The,
it.
We are.
The nominee has been
I'm worried we
filibustered.
don't have an ambassador in Seoul and most of the rest of the world. I'm concerned.
By the way, I do want to take a second and thank the gentleman, distinguished gentleman, for his work to try and resuscitate a gentleman and another gentleman who did survive. And I think that was into a large part due to physicians who were members of our conference who jumped off the train as quick as they could. Thank you very much. Dr. Bashan, among others, and Catherine, his wife, did that too, and I thank them very much. Okay, we've now finished our work for the day, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Or see you tomorrow, too.
Hey, do you have 38 seconds?